The possibility that one person's contempt will spread to his neighbours reflects to the social nature of these emotions and attitudes. That is how they work, through our concern for our standing among our fellows, which is reflected in the patterns of their shared respect and contempt. And these contagious evaluations are central forces in the social shaping of human behaviour. Cecilia is worried, as she says, about being exposed to indignity. She's concerned, that is, not just about being mistreated, but about being, so to say, misregarded. So her anxiety is not simply that she will be disliked, it is that she will be judged against a standard and found wanting. To honour someone, or to treat them as dishonourable, is to make a judgment, founded in a claim, implicit or explicit, that they have met or failed to meet criteria. And that claim is therefore itself subject to challenge as factually incorrect. You could also challenge the standard, of course. You could reject the criteria. But whether or not you accept them, you can dispute whether they are met. This is one of the reasons why the evaluations of honour are contagious. If I draw attention to your failure to live up to a standard, others who accept the standard are bound either to share my evaluation or to deny the factual basis of my judgment. So too when I draw attention to your successes. But the contagion of esteem and contempt is not just the result of a convergence on how someone measures up, as a matter of fact, to some criterion. Our social psychologies are built around the disposition to share the standards of those with whom we share our lives. It's just a fact about us that we're inclined to move towards valuing what we discover is valued around us, especially by those whom we like and respect. From the perspective of the agent, to value something is to judge it valuable, and what is valuable is not just what we happen to like. And so the tendency to converge on a standard is the counterpart in the evaluative domain of our wider tendency to converge in judgment. In 1936, Muzaffar Sharif and his colleagues did a famous experiment that demonstrated this phenomenon in the case of perceptual judgments, relying on a perceptual illusion that is known as the autokinetic effect, in which a still point of light in a dark room appears to move. Sharif asked people to stare at a light in the dark and then decide how far it had moved. Of course, it hadn't moved at all, but they didn't know that. In most cases, what happened was this. They began with a widely scattered range of judgments, but converged eventually on an answer. Finally, he asked people to do the task in pairs, but this time one of them was a Confederate who had been instructed to offer estimates that were either above or below those of the real subject, whatever the subject decided. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the subject's judgments converged towards the Confederates. The contagion of honour and dishonour is a result of convergences in judgment that reflect the ways in which we build a common picture of the world we share. The thought that evaluations are objective, reflecting standards that are not just our own, is a presupposition of talk of what is honourable and dishonourable. Without this thought, you and I would be limited to observing what we individually found worthy, and talk of finding worthy would itself in the end be reducible to private dispositions, correlated contingently perhaps with other people's private dispositions, but not susceptible to rational discussion. Thank you. There would be no real point in speaking of finding something worthy, since you can only find what is there independently of your judgments about it. The line of experiments that begins with Sharif's work with the autokinetic effect led to other experiments in which the convergence was in what people said rather than in what they believed. The reason is obvious. People want to be liked, and disagreeing with a developing consensus makes you dislikable, except perhaps in a philosophy department. Once you've come to a consensus, though, you will have to do more than express agreement. You will have to live by what you've agreed to, or you will risk once more the consequences of being disliked. Suppose you thought, as many modern people claim to do, that there is nothing that our evaluations are responses to, that they are simply reflections of our desires. Socially shaped desires, for sure, which may be aligned for that reason, but in the end still just, in the jargon of emotivism, pro-attitudes. This process I just described could still produce conformity to publicly agreed norms at least in contexts where defections from them were detectable by others. The system of honour will operate as a central element in this process of sustaining conformity because its contagious evaluations have a particular sort of content. When I honour you for your conspicuous success in meeting a standard, I endorse the standard, I encourage you to go on meeting it, and I support you in your efforts to do so. My esteem for you may be based on one dimension of your behaviour, but it can show up in all sorts of responses to you. If I esteem you, I will trust you, collaborate with you, respect your judgments, perhaps simply like you. And these are all things we have reasons of prudence to hope for in those among whom we live. But our sociability is reflected in the fact that we care not just about how we are treated, but about how we are regarded. And the attitudes that come with esteem are desirable, if you are a normally constituted human being, in themselves. Similarly, and in the other direction, contempt or disrespect or dishonour will generate a wide range of reactive attitudes that we would prefer to avoid: resentment, anger, or distrust. And these attitudes are not only unpleasant in themselves, but will lead to behaviour that we are likely to find at the very least inconvenient. So not only are you evaluated for doing something worthy or unworthy, but the mechanisms of honour first point to reasons to act in one way rather than another, reflecting judgments against the standard which they endorse, and second, add to those reasons because honour and dishonour are themselves to be, respectively, desired and feared. If you reject the standard, you will still have this second reason to care about honour. But since the standards are in fact widely shared, especially within societies, you will usually have the first reason too. In defending the study of these processes, Geoffrey Brannan and Philip Pettit, my colleague at Princeton, have argued, in the argot of contemporary social science, that the fact that there is an interactive, improvable system for the allocation of esteem suggests that the economy of esteem ought to be an intriguing area of investigation. Their most important insight, I think, comes is one about the judgments expressed in patterns of esteem and what they call disesteem, and in their understanding in particular of the way in which those judgments are comparative. This is obvious enough where the standard that underlies esteem is social status, as it was in Wellington and Winchelsea's culture of honour. For social status is intrinsically positional. It's a hierarchy, ranking some above others. But judgments of esteem, whatever the standard, almost always entail comparison to a reference group. Esteem is normally sensitive, as they say, not just to the basic rating I award, but also to the level at which I think people generally rate in the person's reference group. It is as a nurse, say, that I esteem you for being kind. And the quantum of kindness that merits esteem in a nurse may be lower than the self-sacrificing kindness of a mother, and higher than the kindness of an ordinary Good Samaritan. When we don't make the reference group explicit, a contextual and implicit assumption has to be made about whether it is people in general or some narrower reference group against which a person is being judged. So honour is distributed not just according to a standard, but more particularly in virtue of how a person measures against that standard by comparison with a relevant reference group. On this theory, as Brannan and Pettit observe, we have two reasons to care about esteem. One is pragmatic and the other epistemic. The pragmatic one I mentioned earlier. My interactions with others will usually go better if they esteem me, and worse if I am held in contempt. The epistemic reason for seeking esteem is that, especially in those who know you, it confirms your sense that you are succeeding in keeping up with the norms. And if you share the norms, this will bring the good news that you are faithful to your own ideals. We all know that we are poor judges in our own case. We have reason, then, to seek the juster judgment of those who see us with a less skewed vision. This epistemic interest of esteem naturally gives you a reason to care most about the views of those who know the truth about you and have the right standards. Esteem, conceived of in this sort of way, was once a major topic of ethical and political philosophy. Hume thought it important. You will find it in Montesquieu and Smith, Adam Smith, and Tocqueville as well. One reason that esteem went out of fashion as the subject of serious and endorsing analysis was the conflation of esteem with honour as conceived of in the aristocratic world of Wellington and Winchelsea. It died, like the Duel, with aristocratic honour. But esteem was also always subjected to sceptical scrutiny in Christian culture. To care for one's honour seems too close to cultivating an unchristian vanity. In response to skepticism of Wilberforce's kind, the kind of skepticism that an evangelical would have expressed about honour in the